In 1975, Singapore made a decision that would forever change its approach to drug crime, implementing one of the world's harshest drug laws, the mandatory death penalty for drug trafficking. But what drove this small nation to take such extreme measures, and how has this controversial policy shaped Singapore's society over the past 5 decades? Welcome to our deep dive into one of modern history's most debated legal policies. Today, we'll explore how Singapore transformed from a drug-plagued port city into a nation known for its strict anti-drug stance and examine the lasting implications of this landmark decision. To understand Singapore's radical approach, we need to step back to the early 1970s. The newly independent nation faced a severe drug crisis. Heroin addiction was rampant, with estimates suggesting that 1 in every 300 people was dependent on drugs. The country's strategic location along major trade routes made it particularly vulnerable to drug trafficking, serving as a key transit point for the infamous Golden Triangle's narcotics trade. Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's founding father and first prime minister, believed that drugs posed an existential threat to the young nation's development. He saw how narcotics were destroying families, increasing crime rates, and undermining the workforce's productivity. The existing laws, which included imprisonment and fines, seemed insufficient to combat the growing crisis. In response, the Singapore government introduced the Misuse of Drugs Act in 1973, which was amended in 1975 to include the mandatory death penalty for trafficking certain quantities of drugs. The threshold amounts were clearly defined: 15 grams of heroin, 30 grams of cocaine, or 500 grams of cannabis would automatically trigger a death sentence. The implementation of this law marked a significant departure from the British colonial legal system Singapore had inherited. It removed judicial discretion in drug trafficking cases meeting these thresholds. Judges had no choice but to impose the death penalty, regardless of circumstances. The government's rationale was straightforward: create a deterrent so severe that potential traffickers would think twice before using Singapore as a transit point. Lee Kuan Yew famously stated, "If we don't push hard against the drug menace, we will not survive." The immediate effects of the law were dramatic. Singapore saw a sharp decline in drug trafficking cases within the first few years. The message was clear: Singapore would show no mercy to drug traffickers. The policy became a cornerstone of the nation's reputation for strict law enforcement. However, the human cost of this policy has been significant. Since its implementation, hundreds of people have been executed under these laws. Many were young drug mules, often from disadvantaged backgrounds, recruited by sophisticated trafficking networks. Their stories have fueled ongoing debates about the law's fairness and effectiveness. The international community's response has been largely critical. Human rights organizations have consistently condemned the policy as cruel and disproportionate. The United Nations has repeatedly called for Singapore to abolish the death penalty, arguing that it violates international human rights standards. Despite this criticism, Singapore has steadfastly defended its position. Government officials point to the country's low drug abuse rates, among the lowest in the world, as evidence of the policy's success. They argue that the harsh penalty has saved countless lives by preventing drug abuse and its associated social problems. The policy has influenced other countries in the region. Malaysia and Indonesia have similar laws, though their implementation varies. This has created what some call a death penalty belt in Southeast Asia for drug offenses. In 2012, Singapore made its first modification to the law, introducing limited discretion for judges in specific cases where traffickers provided substantial assistance to authorities or proved they were merely couriers with significantly diminished responsibility. However, the mandatory death penalty remains the default for most trafficking cases. The debate continues today. Supporters argue that the policy has been crucial in maintaining Singapore's drug-free environment and social order. Critics contend that there is no conclusive evidence that the death penalty is more effective than other harsh punishments in deterring drug crime. The impact on Singapore's criminal justice system has been profound. The country has developed one of the world's most sophisticated anti-drug enforcement mechanisms, with extensive surveillance, strict border controls, and comprehensive rehabilitation programs for addicts. Looking ahead, Singapore shows no signs of changing its stance. The government maintains that the policy remains relevant and necessary in today's context, particularly with the emergence of new synthetic drugs and increasingly sophisticated trafficking networks. What's undeniable is that Singapore's 1975 decision has fundamentally shaped its approach to social order and governance. It reflects a wider philosophy that prioritizes collective security over individual circumstances and deterrence over rehabilitation for serious crimes. As we conclude, it's worth reflecting on how one policy decision can so dramatically influence a nation's development and international reputation. Singapore's approach to drug trafficking remains a powerful example of how societies grapple with balancing human rights concerns against perceived threats to social order. What do you think about Singapore's approach? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos exploring pivotal moments in legal and social policy around the world.